a comic book enthusiast obsessed with superheroes, injects himself with a spider gene in hopes of becoming Spider-Man. However, things go horribly wrong and his life spirals into chaos. Today, we recap the story of the 2001 movie Earth vs. the Spider. Quentin Kemmer wakes up to the annoying sound of his alarm and starts his morning routine. Living in a rundown neighborhood, he's used to the questionable surroundings, like the drunken old man Willie shouting under his window, but he greets him with a smile. Quentin has breakfast with his dog, Thor, and reads the newspaper, which features a story about a dangerous criminal who has claimed 7 victims. He dreams of fighting crime himself, but is only able to land a job as a security guard. As he leaves his apartment, he bumps into his new neighbor, Stephanie, a pretty nursing student who moved to the area for work. Outside, local thugs harass them, and Quentin tries to de-escalate the situation, but the bullies only get bolder, embarrassing the timid Quentin. Stephanie steps in to defend him, making him feel even more ashamed. Before heading to work, Quentin stops by a comic book store where his friend Han works. Surrounded by superhero memorabilia, he feels a surge of confidence. A rare Spider-Man action figure arrives at the store, exciting Quentin, and Han promises to hold it for him until he can save enough money. Han also gives Quentin a new issue of the Spider-Man comic, detailing the superhero's origin story. Feeling a bit better, Quentin arrives at his security job at a biochemistry lab, where he patrols with his partner, Papa Nick. Nick asks Quentin if he's asked Stephanie out yet, but Quentin, doubting himself, believes he doesn't stand a chance. Nick reassures him that he's a good guy and expresses his pride in Quentin. As they patrol, the two see scientists experimenting on spiders in one of the lab rooms, injecting a spider with a mysterious red serum. Curious about the experiment's outcome, Quentin tries to watch, but the scientist closes the blinds. As the evening shift ends, Quentin dives back into his comic book, to the dismay of his partner Nick. The young man explains to his older partner that comic books allow him to escape reality and have vivid, colorful dreams. He talks with admiration about the superhero Spider-Man, who fights villains and helps people, inspiring Quentin to want to be like him. As Quentin heads out on his final patrol, Nick stays behind, monitoring the security cameras. Suddenly, he spots 2 unidentified men assaulting a scientist and dragging her into a lab. Nick tries to sound the alarm, but it fails. Grabbing his pepper spray, he rushes to help. Meanwhile, Quentin returns to the security office and sees on the CCTV footage that an armed criminal has taken Nick hostage. He races to the lab, but 2 older, more experienced officers intercept him. The guards prepare to storm the room, but Quentin tries to stop one of them. A gunfight erupts, and when it finally quiets, Quentin and Officer Williams enter the devastated room, where all the combatants lie dead. Quentin finds Nick mortally wounded, and his partner dies in his arms. Struggling to process his loss, Quentin is confronted by Officer Williams, who blames Nick's incompetence for the tragic outcome. Quentin, in turn, accuses Williams' partner of causing the mess, sparking a fight between the two. Their confrontation is interrupted by Detective Jack Grillo, who arrives at the scene, orders the aggressive cop to calm down, and begins his investigation. A lab worker tells the detective that no valuable items were taken, leaving the purpose of the attack a mystery. However, the biochemistry lab conducts research on resistance to weapons of mass destruction, which may offer a clue. For Quentin, the situation takes a disastrous turn. The management fires him for failing to fulfill his duties, and reporters swarm the scene. One journalist steps on a spider that escaped from the lab, but it remains unharmed. The media paints Quentin as the main culprit of the incident, further adding to his stress. Struggling with the weight of his emotions, Quentin starts hearing voices urging him to return to the lab. He goes back to the room where the spider experiments were conducted, places his hand under the injection machine, and lets a mysterious red substance enter his bloodstream, causing him to pass out. The next day, Stephanie notices that Quentin's alarm clock is still ringing, which worries her, as they usually leave for work at the same time. Quentin's apartment is in disarray, with clothes scattered everywhere, and he is lying naked in a bathtub filled with ice. That night, Stephanie finds a newspaper article about Quentin outside her door, and concerned for his well-being, decides to check on him. The door to his apartment is unlocked, and inside she finds the fridge wide open, with the alarm clock still ringing. Thor, Quentin's dog, leads her to the bathroom, where she's shocked to see red stains on the tub. Suddenly, Quentin appears, startling her even more. He explains his side of the story, though he still feels unwell. Stephanie helps him with his injuries, but when she notices a puncture mark on his arm, she panics, assuming he's experiencing drug withdrawal. Quentin reassures her that it was an accident in the lab and he just got pricked by something. Calming down, Stephanie offers her condolences for Nick's death, and Quentin admits he's tired of being powerless and longs for a change in his life. Before heading back to her apartment, Stephanie subtly hints to Quentin that she appreciates kind guys like him. Quentin smiles warmly, but soon another wave of pain overwhelms him. The next morning, he wakes up feeling ravenously hungry. He devours all the meat he can find in his fridge, consuming it with unusual intensity. Later that evening, dressed in all black, he looks sadly at a photo of himself and his former partner before heading to the bar where the cops like to gather. At the bar, Quentin watches Officer Williams, who is enjoying himself with a blonde woman. The bartender notices a strange tattoo on Quentin's arm and begins talking enthusiastically about tattoos. Quentin is shocked to see black lines forming a spiderweb-like pattern on his skin. He asks if Williams is planning to leave with the blonde, and the bartender warns him not to get involved with the bad-tempered officer. The bartender also reveals that the blonde is Jack Grillo's wife. Rumor has it that neither she nor the other cops respect Grillo, who they consider weak after he failed to save his partner 6 months ago. Quentin sympathizes with that feeling. Soon, Jack Grillo walks into the bar and confronts Williams, asking his wife to go home. The situation escalates into a heated argument, with the two men taking jabs at each other over the deaths of their partners. Grillo finally forces his wife to leave, while Williams immediately finds another girl to flirt with. Quentin, still unsure about confronting Williams, quietly leaves the bar. Not long after, Quentin gets the chance to test his newfound abilities. As Stephanie returns home from work, she notices someone following her. Just as she's about to enter her apartment, a mysterious assailant grabs her and throws her to the floor. She struggles to fight back, but her attacker is far stronger. Meanwhile, outside, Quentin is momentarily distracted by the homeless man Willie, who asks him for money. Suddenly, Quentin feels a strange sensation throughout his body, alerting him that something is wrong inside the building. He spots Stephanie's keys on the ground and rushes to help. Inside, the villain strikes Stephanie and begins to tear at her clothes. Quentin intervenes, effortlessly hurling the attacker several meters away, smashing him into the door of a neighboring apartment. As Stephanie begins to recover, Quentin, wanting to remain anonymous, quickly escapes down the fire escape. He notices that the strange tattoo on his arm has grown even larger. Detective Jack Grillo soon arrives with the police, and they discover that the villain's neck was snapped by the sheer force of Quentin's throw. Grillo questions Stephanie, but she cannot recall the face of her mysterious savior. Later, Quentin appears at her apartment door, and she rushes into his arms, tearfully recounting the attack and describing her rescuer as a true hero. Back at his own place, Quentin finally lets his emotions spill over. He is ecstatic about the incredible power he now possesses. His dream has finally come true. He's become just like his favorite superhero. Meanwhile, a weary Jack Grillo returns home and tells his wife about the latest crime in the city. He regrets not having caught the criminal himself and feels overshadowed by the unknown hero cleaning up the streets. The detective attempts to reconnect with his wife, but she's passed out drunk, unresponsive to his efforts. In the middle of the night, Quentin wakes up with his senses heightened to an unbearable degree. Every noise in the house irritates him, and in frustration, he locks his dog in the bathroom because the sound of paw licking is too much to handle. After a restless night, Quentin turns to his Spider-Man comics for guidance on how to embrace his new identity as a superhero. He admires his now muscular body and spider web-like tattoo. Channeling his hero, he installs a surveillance camera in the hallway and replaces his bed with a hammock resembling a spider's web. Through his new surveillance setup, Quentin notices Stephanie carrying boxes in the hallway. Worried she might be moving out after the recent attack, he rushes to offer his help. Stephanie reassures him that she's just taking some items to the basement, and Quentin insists on accompanying her. Outside, they're confronted once again by local troublemakers, but this time, Quentin easily fights them off with newfound confidence. Impressed by his bravery, Stephanie grows even more fond of him. Quentin is tempted to confess his feelings, but awkwardly drops her box, revealing that she also loves superhero comics. This discovery strengthens their connection, and they share a sweet, romantic moment. The following day, Quentin visits Han's store, embracing his new identity. His attention is caught by a black-and-white film playing, Earth vs. the Spider, where a giant spider attacks helpless people. Han remarks how spiders savor the fear of their prey and enjoy watching them squirm. Quentin, feeling cocky, tells Han that he's developed superpowers, but his friend doesn't believe him. When Han asks Quentin to pay for a collectible Spider-Man action figure, Quentin arrogantly takes it without paying. At home, Quentin begins to experience vivid hallucinations and a growing aversion to food. He wakes up in the middle of the night, literally hanging from the ceiling. Now able to shoot webs from his chest like Spider-Man, Quentin tests his abilities by covering objects in his apartment with sticky threads. Emboldened by his powers, he goes too far and immobilizes his dog, Thor, in webbing. Overwhelmed with guilt, he apologizes to his terrified pet, but is overcome with hunger at the sight of the trapped dog. Horrified by his own urges, Quentin flees the house in panic. Roaming the streets in a delirious state, his hunger only intensifies. He stumbles into a convenience store, where he finds the clerk being assaulted by an unknown criminal. Seizing the opportunity to act like a true hero, Quentin slams the attacker into a shelf with astonishing force. But instead of being grateful, the store clerk's girlfriend rushes to the criminal's aid, devastated by his lifeless body. Furious and overwhelmed by her cries, Quentin shoots a web, silencing and immobilizing the woman before fleeing the scene, his hunger still gnawing at him. Quentin's body continues to mutate, and he's horrified to discover that his arm is transforming into a claw. Just then, Officer Williams bursts into the store, forcing Quentin to hide among the boxes. After finding the store clerk in the back, the officer questions her about the incident. Unable to restrain himself any longer, Quentin attacks Williams and drags him away. The next morning, Stephanie finds Thor outside her door with a note attached to his collar. The note, from Quentin, asks her to take care of his dog temporarily. Worried, she tries to reach out to him, but there's no response. Meanwhile, Quentin lies exhausted on his bed, watching Stephanie through his surveillance camera. He longs to confide in her about his condition, but fears that she'll be terrified by the monster he's becoming. At the same time, something unsettling is digesting in his bloated stomach. At the crime scene, the investigators find the stiffened body of the salesgirl's boyfriend, appearing as though all life had been drained from him. Detective Jack Grillo and his team examine the store, noticing remnants of spider webs on the walls. Grillo's keen eye catches drops of red liquid on the steps and a name tag belonging to the missing Officer Williams. The surviving salesgirl tells the police that they were attacked by a man whose hand had turned into a claw. Later that night, Quentin is jolted awake by sharp pain in his gums. In the mirror, he sees a spider's sting slowly emerging from his mouth. Horrified by his latest transformation, he screams in terror. Hearing his cries, Stephanie rushes to his door, pleading with him to let her in. In a heartfelt conversation through the door, Quentin asks her if she'd ever go on a date with him. Surprised but happy, Stephanie admits she's been waiting for him to ask and suggests they have a romantic evening right away. But Quentin, heartbroken, tells her it's too late and sends her away, unable to confess that he's turning into a monster and the transformation is irreversible. The next morning, Quentin wakes up in his usual state, giving him hope that he might still be able to control his superpowers and the spider transformation. However, by evening, the hunger returns, and he trashes his apartment in a desperate search for food. Stephanie hears his screams and the chaos through the wall, but is helpless to assist him. Eventually, Quentin finds a sinister way to satisfy his hunger. He lures local hooligans into the basement and devours them. Meanwhile, Jack Grillo's wife, distraught over her missing lover, Officer Williams, pleads with her husband to find him. She accuses Grillo of knowing Williams' whereabouts and hiding it from everyone. Frustrated, Grillo storms out, ignoring her as she hurls a glass in his direction. Determined to uncover the truth, Grillo arrives at Quentin's building and discovers a massive web draped across the basement railing. He collects samples and takes them to the chemistry lab where Quentin once worked. The detective is deeply disturbed when he learns that the lab management is keeping their research under tight secrecy. Under the threat of a search warrant, Grillo forces the lab director to reveal the truth behind their experiments. The scientist admits that they have been experimenting with spiders, studying their regenerative abilities and relentless urge to devour prey. However, they've never injected this spider substance into humans, so they can't predict the consequences. Meanwhile, Stephanie is desperately trying to figure out what's happening to Quentin. He's in terrible condition, struggling to control his further mutations. After she leaves, Quentin sneaks out and breaks into Han's store. To resist his predatory instincts, he pleads with Han not to move. He returns the money for the action figure and asks Han to remind him of his favorite superhero's weakness. Han replies that the Avenger spider has a human heart, and if it stops beating, the hero would die. Armed with this information, Quentin walks away, barely suppressing his urge to devour his friend. Detective Jack Grillo, heartbroken over his failures at work and the collapse of his marriage, drinks heavily at a bar before deciding to continue his investigation. He heads to Quentin's house again, but by now, Quentin has almost fully transformed into a monster. Without waiting for a response, Grillo returns to his car, suspecting there may be human DNA in the web samples he collected. However, his colleagues refuse to analyze it, and Grillo is warned that he's being pushed off the case. All the while, Grillo's wife follows him, hoping he will lead her to Officer Williams. Trusting his instincts, Grillo enters Quentin's basement, where he discovers a horrifying scene: cocoons of human victims trapped in spider webs. To his shock, Officer Williams is still alive inside one of the cocoons. As Grillo tries to free him, his wife bursts into the room, distracting him. Williams, in despair, shoots himself. Meanwhile, Quentin appears and drags Grillo's wife away. Though Grillo drives Quentin off, it's too late. His wife dies. Back at home, Stephanie notices a broken window on the second floor and spots Quentin's silhouette in the hall. By now, Quentin has completely transformed into a grotesque mutant with 6 spider legs protruding from his back. He attacks Stephanie and drags her away. Grillo hears the commotion and rushes upstairs, but Quentin has already escaped with his captive. Following the trail of spiderwebs, Grillo tracks them to an abandoned building, where he finds a terrified Stephanie pinned to a massive web. Quentin, now fully transformed into a spider-like creature, retains a shred of his humanity. He begs Grillo to shoot him in the heart to stop him and save Stephanie. Torn with indecision, Grillo hesitates. Stephanie pleads with Quentin to come to his senses, believing that it's not too late to reverse the transformation. But Quentin knows there's no turning back. He lunges toward Stephanie, forcing Grillo to fire multiple shots. One bullet strikes Quentin's heart, and he freezes, just inches away from her. In his final moments, the good within him prevails, and Stephanie thanks him for saving her from his uncontrollable, monstrous form. As the story concludes, Han shares the tale of a new comic book special featuring Quentin, the superhero who was once his friend. What did you think of this movie? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.